So you want to know more about Jingyuan? Well, you're at the right place. Because in this little deep dive, I will basically tell you everything that you need to know about Jingyuan, from what relics do you want to use on him, to what Lightcones are nice on him, to what teammates are nice with him. So I would say let's get into it. Let's look at his skill first. So normally I actually start with the basic attack, skill and ultimate, but to actually make sense of them I will start with the talent first. Now the talent is really the bread and butter of Jingyuan's kit. This is where, a chunk of damage lies. This is basically what his entire being is centered around on the field. So it's a giant wall of text, but I'm going to summarize it for you. Jingyuan basically has a summon called the Lightning Lord. This Lightning Lord is basically a character on itself. They have their own turn, and you will also see them as an entity in the action order. So here it says that the Lightning Lord has a base speed of 60 and 3 action points. Now, this is something very important to remember. Action points is something that is going to return over and over again, so just make sure to remember. So for each action point, whenever it's his turn, he will do a certain amount of damage to a single enemy, and then a quarter of that damage to adjacent enemies. So right away you can see that the Lightning Lord focuses quite a lot on single target damage and, does it decently well, You will have 3 base action points, which means that basically always you're going to do 198% of Jingyuan's attack to one enemy. And then, a quarter of that goes to adjacent enemies. Right away, he actually does a pretty good amount of damage. But you might think 60 speed is pretty low. Can't we, increase that? And yes, we can. So basically, for every single action point you gain up to 10, the Lightning Lord's speed will increase by 10. So let's say that you gain 3 action points. The speed is going to increase by 30, which is going to total at 90 base speed, which is actually pretty nice. And of course, with every single action point added, he is just going to do an extra instance of damage. So in the case of, if you get 3 action points, it will total at 6, and you will do that 66% single target damage 6 times over. So you can already see that gaining action points is very important, not just to make the Lightning Lord faster, so he can deal damage faster, but it also increases the amount of damage he does per attack by quite a lot. But something very important to add is after the Lightning Lord does its attack, its speed and action points are reset to the base. So if you gain 3 action points, its speed will be buffed and the amount of hits the Lightning Lord does is buffed. But once he has actually done that, buffed amount of damage, it will revert back to 60 base speed and 3 base action points. So that is very, very important. So we basically have to make sure that these action points keep on coming in. Then of course, if Jingyuan dies, the Lightning Lord disappears, and if Jingyuan is crowd controlled, the Lightning Lord is also unable to take action. So this basically means that making sure that, Jingyuan is not frozen or something else becomes quite important, because this basically means that you're not only losing damage from Jingyuan not being able to take action, but also the Lightning Lord not being able to take action. So yeah, pretty important to keep that debuff off of him. So now that we have a better idea of what Jingyuan is all about, now that we know what the Lightning Lord does, let's actually look at the skills. So the basic attack does nothing special, so we'll skip that. Then on to the skill. He deals 100% of his attack to all enemies and increases the Lightning Lord's action points by 2. So finally we see this is where he's going to get his action points from. So basically Jingyuan is going to be a character that wants to do his skill permanently. Basically ever using his basic attack means that you're missing out on, not just damage from his skill, but of course, you're missing out on that extra damage you're getting from the Lightning Lord. Then onto his ult, energy cost of 130, which is, on the higher side for sure. He deals 200% of his attack to all enemies and increases the action points of the Lightning Lord by 3 this time. So straight away we see that not just using the skill but also getting that ult frequently is very important to maximize that damage from the Lightning Lord. And then we go over to the technique. After he uses the technique, when he enters battle, the action points are increased by 3 straight away. So that is definitely very nice to, increase that burst damage at the beginning. So right away we see that there's a lot of synergy in the abilities, but everything is really centered around the Lightning Lord. So as I said, the bread and butter of this character. So when it comes to the priority of which skill you should upgrade first, it is for sure the talent, because, this is what it's all about. So now on to the traces. The first trace reads, if the action point points of the Lightning Lord are 6 or higher, its crit damage increases by 25%. So right away we see once again, he focuses everything on the Lightning Lord. This is going to increase the damage the Lightning Lord is going to do. Now, important for this is that to actually get 6 points, because of course you start off with 3, you will need to use or your ultimate once or your skill twice. So right away we see here that it becomes kind of important to use Jingyuan's skill twice before the Lightning Lord attacks, which means that Jingyuan needs a little bit of speed so he can actually get 2 turns before the Lightning Lord gets his first turn. Then onto the second trace. At the start of the battle, immediately regenerate 15 energy. This is also very nice because once again, the faster you do your ult, the faster you get those 3 action points for the Lightning Lord, the faster the Lightning Lord is going to attack and the more damage he is going to do. So once again, very centered around Mr. Lightning Lord. And then the last one is going to be after using his skill, crit rate increases by 10% for 2 turns. And as I said before, he is focused completely on doing his skill all the time. So this is basically going to be a permanent crit rate buff, which is just, very nice to increase his average damage. And it synergizes pretty well with the first trace because the first trace increases the crit damage of the Lightning Lord. And then here, the crit rate is increased for Jingyuan and the Lightning Lord. So yeah, this is definitely very nice. As we can see that Jingyuan is very, very crit focused. If you also just look at the nodes here, you can see that there's quite a lot of crit rate. Here we have 2.7%, here we have 4%, here we have 5.3%. So right out of the gate, Jingyuan actually already has 20% crit rate, which is honestly pretty nuts because this means that it is going to be way easier building him for crit, so you can put way more investment into crit damage, which is going to increase your total damage by a lot. So when it comes to priority, I would definitely say that the first trace becomes pretty important to just increase that damage of the Lightning Lord. Now, of course, the third trace, like by the time you actually unlock the third trace, you probably already have like a decent amount of crit rate, crit damage, but this definitely helps out with, building for crit rate. And then the last one, I would say trace number 2, it's definitely nice to get that ult at the beginning of the battle, but it's only at the beginning of the battle. So if it's a long battle, the value of this trace decreases a little bit. So I would definitely say that the other 2 are more important. Now onto his Eidolons. Now, of course, I don't really talk much about Eidolons, and I don't really recommend spending on them because it can potentially cost you hundreds of dollars, but it's nonetheless pretty fun to just look at what his Eidolons have to offer. So his first Eidolon reads: when the Lightning Lord attacks, the damage multiplier on the enemies adjacent to the target increases by 25%. So if you look back to the Lightning Lord talent, you can see here that you do single target damage, and then 25% of that single target damage is dealt to adjacent enemies. So his Eidolon 1 basically increases it from 25% to 50%. So basically his Eidolon 1 increases the AoE capability of the Lightning Lord, which, is pretty nice, especially because Jingyuan is a erudition character, so specializing more into that AoE damage is, pretty nice. Onto his Eidolon 2, after the Lightning Lord takes action, damage caused by Jingyuan's basic attack, skill, and ultimate is increased by 20% for 2 turns. So because this is 2 turns, you can basically see this as a permanent buff. I don't think this buff is ever going to disappear. Maybe if you're frozen or something and your turns basically get wasted, but in a normal situation this is basically going to be a permanent buff. Now Jingyuan's skill and ultimate are all about just attacking all enemies, so his Eidolon 2 focuses on increasing the AoE capability of Jingyuan himself. Then onto Eidolon 4, for each hit performed by the Lightning Lord when he takes action, Jingyuan regenerates 2 energy. So this is a pretty funny one because this is kind of like a recycling ability. So if you think about it, so the Lightning Lord takes action. Depending on the amount of hits he does, he regenerates a certain amount of energy to Jingyuan, which means that Jingyuan is going to get his ult faster. And of course, as we saw, his ult gives these action points to the Lightning Lord, which makes the Lightning Lord faster and deal more damage. So I would definitely say this is a pretty funny Eidolon. It really is all about the Lightning Lord basically helping himself out, attacking more frequently. So yeah, pretty nice. And then we go over to Eidolon number 6. For each hit performed by the Lightning Lord when he takes action, he makes the enemies vulnerable. While vulnerable, enemies take 12% more damage until the end of the Lightning Lord's current turn, stacking up to 3 times. Right away, this is really really OP. As we said before, Lightning Lord is the bread and butter of Jingyuan. He's going to do a considerable chunk of the damage. So then being able to increase that damage by 36%, that's pretty insane. But then it's also very important to note that this only buffs the Lightning Lord and not your entire team, because as you can see here, basically the enemies become vulnerable when the Lightning Lord hits them, but then it disappears after its current turn. So basically this vulnerability only lasts while the Lightning Lord hits the enemy. So sadly, nor Jingyuan nor your other teammates are going to be able to make use of this. But nonetheless, this is definitely a very nice Eidolon, and you know, is going to increase the damage the Lightning Lord is going to do. So overall, I would say that he has a pretty nice diversity in his Eidolons. So first off, his Eidolon 1 increases the AoE capability of the Lightning Lord, and then Eidolon 2, the AoE capability of Jingyuan himself. Then the Eidolon 4 improves the energy economy, which just not only means that you pump out the ult more often for damage, but the Lightning Lord also attacks more often. And then we have the E6, which increases the damage the Lightning Lord does. And as I said before, Lightning Lord does focus mostly on single target damage, so this is definitely very nice against bosses. So all in all, I would say, you know, pretty nice Eidolons. So let's go over all of the Lightcones that Jingyuan can use. So right away, let's just get this one out of the way. You know, Jingyuan's Lightcone itself, like, it's the best in slot. It's going to be very good. There's no point talking about it, to be honest. Onto the Himiko one. For every single enemy on the field, it increases the wearer's attack up to 5 stacks, and when an enemy is broken, the damage dealt by the wearer is increased by 30% for 1 turn. So straight away, this definitely favors fighting many enemies, and you know, it does fit Jingyuan because, you know, he's an AoE DPS just like any other Erudition character. But I do have to say that when you're battling a boss, and let's say there's only one boss on the field, then you know that 9% is definitely not a lot, but you do still get that 30% damage buff for 1 turn when the enemy is broken, and of course, you know, breaking basically always happens. But because it's only 1 turn, it's quite situational. You won't be able to make use of it all the time. So in the worst case scenario, all you're getting from this Lightcone is 9% attack, but in the best case scenario, you get like a lot out of it. So a good one, but maybe a bit too situational. Then onto the Herta 4-star one. It increases the damage dealt by follow-up attacks, and you know, if we remember, the Lightning Lord is considered a follow-up attack, meaning that this is definitely a Lightcone that is very focused on the Lightning Lord doing maximum damage. And if the enemy is on 50% or lower HP, basically the value gets doubled. So I would say that because the Lightning Lord is of course the centerpiece of, you know, Jingyuan's kit, this actually becomes a really nice option and definitely lets you maximize that damage on the Lightning Lord. You know, especially if we take a look at the max superimpose, you know, 48%, and if the enemy is below 50% HP, it increases to 96%. So it basically lets the Lightning Lord do so much more damage. For a Lightning Lord centered build, I would definitely say that this might actually be the best contender. Then we go on to the Serval one. This gives you energy when you enter the battle and increases your ult damage. So this one actually, like, most people might think like, you know, this is like whatever, but I think this is going to have a niche use and a very good niche use, because if we take a look at Jingyuan's second trace, it gives you 15 energy at the beginning of the battle, and if you combine that with this 20, or you know, if you have max superimpose 32, you know, you get a lot of energy right away, and it increases your ult damage, which basically means that this is going to be a really good Lightcone for sweeping enemies. So let's, for example, say you're in the simulated universe, so let's say you want to clear the mobs up to like the bosses as quickly as possible, then this actually becomes a really good contender, because you get your ult very fast, you pull off your ult, that ult is going to do a lot of damage to all enemies on the field, and you just clear the enemies easily. So even though this is definitely not going to be like good in all situations, in that niche I think it's amazing. Then on to the next one. This one reads, it increases the attack of the wearer unconditionally, and when the wearer defeats an enemy, their crit damage increases by 24% for 3 turns. So straight away the attack is just very nice, you know, attack scaling DPS will take that, and then when he defeats an enemy, he will get that crit damage. Now that conditional is quite nice, you know, as I said before, Jingyuan is very focused on crit rate, so he definitely likes getting that crit damage, but of course this is a conditional and you need to defeat an enemy, so it does lean more towards battles against mobs. Now, of course, a lot of bosses do spawn mobs, so you will get this buff almost always in, mob battles or boss battles. But of course, if for a prolonged time the boss doesn't spawn any mobs, then, this is just going to run out and you're only going to be left with the attack buff, which is, okay. So once again, this is quite a situational one, which wants you to battle against mobs. In the worst case scenario, it is like whatever. In a good to best case scenario, this becomes very strong, especially because the crit damage buff is for 3 entire turns. So if there's enough mobs to kill, then he's basically going to have this buff until the end of the battle. Then on to the next one, the pom-pom one. This is a free-to-play one. If I remember correctly, you get this as a possible drop from weekly bosses, and we also get one for free, I'm pretty sure. So it reads, it increases the wearer's damage by 12% unconditionally, and for every defeated enemy, the wearer's attack increases by 4%, stacking up to 3 times. So right away, we do see a conditional that you need to defeat enemies, but the stacks are permanent. So once you've defeated 3 enemies, you get this attack buff until the end of the battle, which is, in my opinion, really, really good, because of course Jingyuan is a erudition character, he likes to battle against mobs, and honestly, almost every single battle is going to have mobs, like bosses spawn mobs, so all you need to do is kill 3 enemies, boom, you have the max stacks, and now you can just do maximum damage against the boss. So in my opinion, this is actually a really, really good choice, especially because its conditionals really aren't hard to meet. Then on to the last 4-star one, we have the Battle Pass one. Now this is quite an interesting one because it scales on the max energy of the character. And if you remember, Jingyuan has 130 energy cost on his ult. So if we throw that into the calculator, it means that at superimpose 1, you're going to get a 26% damage buff. And of course, if you max superimpose it, it gets doubled, so you'll have 52% damage buff on Jingyuan and the Lightning Lord. So this is actually a very, very nice option if you want to just increase your overall damage. This is going to be nice in all situations against bosses, against mobs, if you want to clear the battle very fast, or if you're fine with clearing it slowly, because of course, there's no turn limitation. You get this buff at the beginning of the battle and it is until the end of the battle. Now, there is a competitor against this one, which is going to be the Herta one. As I said, at max superimpose, you're going to get a 52% damage buff. So the Herta one at max superimpose gives you 48% follow-up attack damage unconditionally. So right away, it's pretty close to the Battle Pass one, but of course, this is only going to buff the Lightning Lord and not Jingyuan. But once the enemy is below 50% HP, this gets doubled. So here is really where you make the choice. Do you want a Jingyuan and the Lightning Lord to do more damage? Then this one becomes the choice. But if you, for example, are in the simulated universe and you have all those follow-up attack buffs, then the Herta one, in my opinion, actually becomes better. And then on to the 3-star Lightcones, I'm pretty sure, beginners are still going to make use of them, so let's go over them. This one increases only the ult damage. I would say this is like whatever, if this is like the only one that you have, then sure, go ahead. But as I said, because you get this one for free, this one becomes a no-brainer, so there's no point actually equipping this. Now on to the next one. This one reads, after the user uses their skill, additionally regenerate energy. So this is actually pretty nice because if you remember, we want to use Jingyuan's ult pretty often because you do get those 3 action points, making the Lightning Lord faster and stronger. But, there's no buffing here. It doesn't increase attack, doesn't increase damage. So it definitely has uses with Jingyuan, but, for a DPS, if you want to maximize damage straight away, then there are better options. Then on to the last one. This is actually the best one. When the wearer uses their ultimate, increases their attack by 24% for 2 turns. Now this is actually very nice because this buffs Jingyuan and the Lightning Lord. And at max superimpose, that's going to be 48%. So for a beginner, this is actually a really, really nice option. And if you can, use your ult every like 3-4 turns, then, it becomes even better because then you almost have this buff permanently, or at least 50% of the time. So there you go. So let's go on to the next topic, which is going to be relics. Now with relics, we are pretty restricted because now in the beginning of the game, of course, we don't have a lot of, relic choices. So straight away, the no-brainer becomes just going for the lightning set, because the 2-piece gives you lightning damage bonus, and the 4-piece, every time you use your skill, it increases the wearer's attack by 20%. And as we know, Jingyuan is basically going to use his skill every single turn, so he's going to have this attack buff permanently. So right away, you know, this kind of becomes a no-brainer, but do we have other options? Kind of, you know, like of course you have this one if you want to like for some reason make him like a breaking character, but of course because there's nothing really in his kit that like focuses on breaking, I don't really recommend it. So the other option would be the Musketeer set, which increases his attack with the 2-piece set, and with the 4-piece set increases his speed, which, you know, as I said before, pretty important, because letting Jingyuan attack twice before the Lightning Lord attacks once is pretty important to maximize the Lightning Lord damage. So this is actually a very nice addition, but then the other part is kind of meh, because it increases basic attack damage, and as I said, he is basically going to use his skill all the time, so this is just a wasted stat. But nonetheless, you know, if you don't have the lightning set on him yet, then this is for sure a very nice placeholder set to put on him. Now for the main stats, what are we looking at? On the body, you definitely want to go with crit rate or crit damage, and on the feet, you know, you have the choice between or attack or speed. Attack, in my opinion, is the no-brainer to just increase his damage, but speed becomes pretty important if you are struggling with, you know, letting Jingyuan attack twice before the Lightning Lord. But of course, as we'll see later on, you can use other teammates to, you know, speed him up a bit, so that doesn't become a problem anymore. You know, in that scenario, if you have those teammates, then attack just becomes a no-brainer. So onto the 2-piece relics, you know, for the planar sphere and the link rope. Here we actually have, you know, a few more options. So straight away we have the space sealing station, which is just going to increase the attack of Jingyuan, which, you know, is just very nice. You know, he'll definitely make use of that. But there are better options if you want to maximize damage, because we have the Celestial Differentiator and Inert Salsoto. So the Celestial Differentiator increases the crit damage by 16%, and for the first attack increases crit rate by 60%. Now, because this is just the first attack, I honestly don't really care about it, to be honest. Of course, it like helps you ensure that, you know, he is going to crit, but because Jingyuan doesn't really have a problem with building crit rate, I don't see much value in that. So most of the value of this set is going to be the crit damage. Now onto the Inert Salsoto, we see that it first gives 8% crit rate, and then if the wearer gets to 50% crit rate, which, you know, he's easily gonna get there, the wearer's ultimate and follow-up attack damage increases by 15%. So right away you might see that this is actually made for him. You know, not only increases his ult, but most importantly the Lightning Lord damage, and it gives you even more crit rate. So if we combine this crit rate with his traces, you know, his traces give around 20% crit rate, we have 5% base crit rate plus this 8%, like your Jingyuan basically starts off with, you know, more than 30% crit rate, and that is without factoring in any substats or, you know, the body main stat. So right away this definitely becomes the best option. But, you know, if you don't have this one, then using this one becomes a nice option, and if you don't have this one, then I would just recommend going with Space Sealing Station. Now for the main stats for the planar sphere, you know, we definitely go with the lightning damage boost, and for the link rope, you know, here you also have the choice between attack or energy regeneration rate. Attack is kind of a no-brainer to just maximize his damage, but if you want to, you know, increase the rate at which you do your ult, for example, if you just want to get those 3 action points faster for the Lightning Lord, then you could go with the energy regeneration, but you can also rely on your teammates to help out with energy regeneration. So I would say just go for the attack percent here. And that actually ties in pretty nicely into the next part, because now we're going to talk about which teammates actually work well with Jingyuan. So let's actually start off with the healers. Now you might think like, huh, why healers? Like, what do healers matter here? How are they going to help him out? Now, if we go back to Jingyuan's talent, you see that when Jingyuan is affected by a crowd controlling debuff, Lightning Lord is unable to take action. So getting crowd controlled is a pretty big hit, not only to Jingyuan's damage but also Lightning Lord's damage. So it's pretty important to make sure that, you know, he isn't crowd controlled, and in that case Natasha's value actually increases by a lot, because of course with her skill she can remove debuffs from her allies. So right away, you know, I would say that Natasha becomes a really good choice as a healer for Jingyuan, which, you know, is nice and free-to-play friendly. Now, onto the tanks, I wouldn't really say that, like, you know, there's like a huge amount of value in tanks, because Jingyuan doesn't really care about being hit. You know, you have some characters like Yangqin which don't want to be hit, right, to keep their buffs, but Jingyuan doesn't really have any of that. So, you know, in his team you're not really forced to actually take a tank with you, but of course, you know, in general content and in difficult content it is still recommended. Then onto the Nihility characters. Here mainly one character is just very nice for Jingyuan, and that is going to be Pella, because her ult decreases the defense of all enemies, and of course all enemies means that Jingyuan with his AoE attacks is going to make maximum use of that, so there's a nice synergy there. And, you know, for the people that have already experienced Pella, they might already know that with her, you know, your DPSs can do so much more damage, so very, very nice teammate. And then another one that we can actually think about is Welt. Now you might think, but he only decreases the speed of the enemies. Well, there is actually value in that. So if we go back to the Lightning Lord's base speed is actually pretty low. So let's say, you know, you do a skill attack, your base speed is going to be 80, which is still on the low side, and enemies are most likely going to be attacking before the Lightning Lord. And there is a problem with this, because of course, you know, like let's say a enemy attacks Jingyuan and he crowd controls him, but Lightning Lord was about to have his turn. Well, you know, that's a shame, because now he won't be able to have his turn. So there is value in letting the Lightning Lord attack before the enemy, and that is really where the value of Welt comes in, because, you know, him slowing down the enemies ensures that the Lightning Lord is going to attack first. So that is also something to think about. And then the last class that, you know, can actually help out Jingyuan is going to be, of course, the Harmony, the buffers. So right away we have Bronya. Bronya is an incredible character with Jingyuan because of her skill, of course. You know, she lets the chosen ally attack immediately. So you remember how I said that you want Jingyuan to attack twice before the Lightning Lord? Well, Bronya makes this so much easier. With her, you basically don't need to care about speed on Jingyuan, because with her, he can just attack twice very easily. You know, he can attack once himself, then Bronya shoots him forward, and then he attacks another time. But, you know, there is a drawback to this, because with this strategy, you are going to eat up a lot of skill points, because Jingyuan of course wants to use a skill, so that's 2 skill points, and then, you know, you need to use the skill of Bronya, that's 3 skill points. And then you only have 2 other allies left, which are going to generate maximum of 2 skill points, so you're in a skill point deficit. So even though this is nice, this is not like super consistent, but nonetheless very, very powerful, because of course, you know, her buffs in general are really good. Besides that, Bronya, of course, her ult also buffs crit damage, and as we said, because Jingyuan is very, you know, builds very easily on crit rate, he values crit damage a lot. So right away Bronya is an amazing teammate for him, but that doesn't mean that the other ones aren't, because Asta is actually also really good on him. So first off, her passive increases attack, which, you know, he can definitely make use of, but then the real kicker is her ult, which increases his speed. This is basically going to ensure that he is going to attack twice before the Lightning Lord, so we can maximize that damage. So right away you can see that, you know, she is very, very useful for Jingyuan, you know, in 2 ways. And then if we go over to Tingyun, the last one, you know, we're all familiar with Tingyun. Tingyun is a really good buffer, and of course she is going to be a very, very good buffer once again for Jingyuan. So her skill is going to increase the attack of Jingyuan, just increasing his raw power, but then her ult can also regenerate energy for the ally, and of course can also increase the damage they deal. So right away here, you know, we'll be able to do the ult more often, get more action points for the Lightning Lord, and the Lightning Lord is going to be faster and stronger. And then you also have her second Eidolon, which actually gives extra energy to the buffed character. So, you know, she's a really, really good battery for him. And I would honestly say that she's basically a staple almost on Jingyuan teams, because there's one more thing about her that actually makes her really, really strong, and that is going to be this light cone. Upon battle entry, if an ally deals the same damage type as the wearer, damage dealt increases by 12%. As we know, Tingyun is lightning, Jingyuan is also lightning, meaning that this light cone will basically give you a permanent buff to Jingyuan. So this actually becomes a really good option, especially if you like max superimpose it. This is a free 24% damage buff. So besides Tingyun just being a good buffer, she even has that light cone synergy. So yeah, she is really like a really, really good character for him. So if we look at, possible teams, I would say, like, for example, if you want to go with a hyper carry team, so like everything is focused on Jingyuan's damage, then you could go Jingyuan, Asta, Tingyun, and Natasha. That way you have all of those beautiful buffs that you need to maximize his damage and speed, and then, Natasha ensures that he isn't crowd controlled, so you keep on pumping out damage. Now, of course, you can make variations in this, you could swap out one of these two for a nihility character, like for example, Welt or Pella. Now, of course, Pella is going to, take the cake here because she increases his damage by a lot, but of course, as I said before, Welt does have value. So there you go, that is going to be my deep dive on Jingyuan. I hope, you're more knowledgeable about him. I hope I explained everything that he can do, which light cones are good on him, which teammates are good on him, and, for the people that are going to summon for him, I hope you're now more confident in just, giving him the team that he deserves. Anyways, thank you for watching the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.